I think, at least for me, the most common feature of my adult life, which unbelievably is like 50 years, has been that every single thing that I was taught to believe as a child, that I believed through my adolescence, has proven to be completely untrue. And I think that's the history of humanity. Over time, everything we have believed about our world has been proven to be untrue. And so, my own personal search, starting when I left high school, has taken me through a number of terrains, social and political and spiritual and economic, and spiritual, I should say religious, and then spiritual, to come to a place where I think there are a few simple things that I'd like to share with you that I think are important. Probably the most important thing I think we need to understand as people is that, and it's simple, we are here for one reason and one reason only. And that reason is we're here to grow. Just like every other living being, living event in this world, we're here to grow. Usually when people will say, well, what does that mean? And my response is, respectfully, it's up to you to figure that out. Because if I tell you, then well, that puts me in the position where I can very easily manipulate you. And that's not my purpose. So it's up to you to figure out what it means to grow, what it means to you. Because all the different ways that we express ourselves are really only the effect, they are not about our growing. People will engage in a career and say, well, that's about, I'm growing my career, or I'm growing something. Or relationship, people think is about growth. All the things that people do, they will say, it's about growth. But that's not true at all, actually. All the things we do are the effects of our growth, and the creative expression that we engage in as a facet of growing, but the growing itself is simply about taking in energy, releasing tension, and allowing our creative energy to flow. This is the mechanics of it. What that looks like is entirely up to you, and dependent upon the feeling, your own inner feeling. However you are inspired or called, bravo. We're in this world to grow. Not having a belief system or at least having a belief system that, well, a belief system. I don't have a belief system anymore. What I have and what I have worked on for the last 45 years is a model. I call it a model. It's my own mental model. And, you know, in fact, that's the best as human beings I think we can do. Some people will look at you and say, the Bible is the literal word of God. Other people will look at you and say, the Bhagavad Gita is something or another. Somebody's always got a book, and it's the literal word of something. And, you know, it turns out over and over and over and over and over again to be not so. So, what I have to share with you, and what I think is important in growing is, I think it's important to have a model. And for me, my model started out with yoga. I was in Bloomington, Indiana in the mid-60s. I was involved in politics on campus of the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, as well as, you know, other more local issues like being able to have girls spend the night in our dorm rooms. You know, important stuff too. And toward the end of my college career, I was so sort of frustrated and disappointed, realizing how rigged the game actually was, that, well, actually I had some friends drag me to a yoga class. One of those friends who dragged me to a yoga class is here with us this morning. She and our other roommate dragged me to they literally dragged me because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to do any of that hippie shit. But I did it, and after a couple of more draggings, it sunk in, and I kept doing it. And the reason why I did yoga then was that it felt really good to do. And that's the whole reason I did it. It felt good to do. I had finally found something to do that in doing it felt really good, and I could wake up the next day and still feel good. The hangover from, in other words, from yoga was wonderful. And so I kept doing it. And I found that the more I did it, the better I felt. And the better I felt, the better the people that I was close to seemed to feel about me and about us and about things in general. And I also found that my life worked better for me when I felt better. And I kept doing it. As I did it, some really surprising, well, I should say unexpected things happened to me. mystical things happened to me. And magical things happened. Things that I can only describe as magical because they were so unexpectedly good. These experiences led me to sort of understand that I needed a teacher. They were very I was having some very powerful experiences. Things like, well, one morning, I used to get up a little bit early and do yoga. I'd get up at 4:30 and do yoga, and then I knew this wasn't exactly, pure, but I'd go get a box of donuts and a quart of chocolate milk and go sit in the park not far from where I was staying and eat my breakfast, and then I go to work. Worked in a grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves. So this one morning, I sit down in the park to have my donuts and chocolate milk, and before I did that, I said, closed my eyes and said a little prayer like, please God, don't let this sugar kill me. And when I opened my eyes again, it was dark. And I'd been sitting there as if it were 30 seconds for like 13 hours. And I had about 20 different things happen in that vein that caused my friends to start worrying about me and caused me to start thinking something really strong is going on here that I need to understand better. And so, for some strange reason, a guy living with Rudy in New York is passing through Bloomington, and somebody I was living with knew him and brought him to meet me, and he shows me a picture of Rudy and says, you should meet him, and I say yes, and that was that. And the next thing I know, I'm in New York. Learning about Kundalini. I was with Rudy for 2 years, and he passed away. And at the age of 23, I'm in charge of a bunch of ashrams in America, 3 in Europe, and there's not a penny. Well, but I was learning about Kundalini. And as time passed, as Rudy passed away, he was beginning to evolve his own model. He was really in the process of completely changing his own model. And in the last part of it, the last 6 months of his life, he was sharing that change in his model with me. And so when he passed away, I decided that the only way I could really understand where he was going with that in his absence was to go back to where he began. So I went to India. And that began a 10-year relationship with Swami Chetanananda. More Kundalini. And much more Indian. Because Rudy, by the time I had met him, was in the process of rejecting his Indian, or at least distancing himself from his Indian experience. But I started studying with Swami Muktananda. With his encouragement and blessing, I became a Swami. My understanding of what I was doing then and what I'm doing now are really quite different. That the model of Swaminess has changed for me. And then in 1978, I was in South Fallsburg, New York, and Muktananda walked into my room. I was laying on my bed. He walked in the afternoon, which was completely rare. I'm laying on the bed reading some science fiction book. He walks in the room, and he doesn't really knock. He just came in. I did what, I rolled off the bed and onto the floor immediately with my forehead on the floor, because that's what you did. That was the proper etiquette. And when I came up, Muktananda looks over at the bed and says, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, that's some science fiction book I was reading." He goes, "Don't read that. Read Shaivism." Well, I did have an idea what he meant, but only barely. But from that moment on in 1978, even until now, the only thing I've been reading, I've never read another science fiction book, or frankly, any work of fiction at all. I have, for the most part, only read Shaivism or books on Buddhism that were part of my exploration of the broader theme of Shaivism, which is the Tantric tradition. And this has become my model. And as that model has developed, I've been involved in for like 30 years, especially since Muktananda passed away, translating Shaiva material from Sanskrit and Italian and French and German, and really trying to understand what the people who developed the terminology around Kundalini and who taught the importance of the energetic mechanism of chakras and channels were thinking when they did this. I wanted to establish a model for people that would be authentic and would endure. I want it to be true. And so I've worked on that for decades. The one thing I can say about Shaivism that causes me, and the Tantric tradition in India, that causes me to continue to appreciate it is that nothing about their worldview, I shouldn't say nothing, most of their worldview has stood the test of time. And the insights that they have had about the nature of human beings and the world in which we exist has continued to be astonishingly close, even though the only measuring device that they ever had was their own mind. I mean, today we have trillions of dollars of measuring devices, from the Hubble telescope and its next generation, which will be launched in a couple of years, to, laser yardsticks that measure the universe, and particle colliders, and astonishing technology. With just their own minds, observing themselves constantly, they came to an extraordinary understanding of our circumstance. I was going to say our predicament. Shaivism basically says the whole universe is alive. There's nothing in the universe that isn't alive, including space. The space between you and I, and the space between the earth and the moon and the sun and the edges of the Milky Way, the space between the Milky Way and Andromeda and every other galaxy. It's completely alive. And the fundamental demonstration of its aliveness is, well, let me explain it to you like this. In the Pratyabhijnana, one of the sort of more accessible texts of Shaivism, it's an 11th century text. The aliveness that permeates the universe is referred to as Shiva. And it takes on this personality, this single identity, because the aliveness of the universe is also self-aware. It is awareness and self-awareness. It is, there's a terminology. But the main, and I could go on for days like this, but the main description of Shiva, apart from Prakash and Vimarsh, is that Shiva is described in terms of his power, or his Shakti. And that power is the power of will, knowledge, and action. And so, and these are Sanskrit terms, and I'm thinking, okay, Icha Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, what does that mean to me? How does that, what am I supposed to make of all those words? If the whole universe is alive and I'm a part of it, then this terminology ought to mean something to me. Okay, so it took me a little while thinking about that, but I got it. You will too if you decide to. The power of Shiva is inhalation, exhalation, and the still point in the middle. Respiratory process. The universe is alive with respiratory process. In the smallest dimension, respiratory process is referred to as spanda, vibration. In the largest process, respiratory process is referred to as Shakti, or the goddess. One of the big popular programs in yoga studios in the last 10 or 12 years has been the study of, or at least the discussion of, goddesses. And everybody has their favorite goddesses. I think mostly the most favorite goddesses are Lakshmi and Kali. Lakshmi because she's supposed to be the goddess of money. It's not exactly right. And Kali because Kali is always kicking somebody's ass. So, show me the money and anybody who gets in my way, I'm going to kick their ass. Wait a minute. This is hardly the Shiva model, but that's the way it sort of plays. Respiratory process. The universe is alive and breathing. And it is that breathing, that respiratory process, which is the basis of awareness itself. Extension, contact. Absorption, knowing. Adapting. Over and over and over again. Is self-awareness. And the fundamental demonstration of life in every living being is respiratory process or our breath. We all know, as did the ancients in South Asia, if it's breathing, it's alive, and if it's not breathing, it's deader than hell. Respiratory process. Looking at attending to respiratory process, what we can say about it is we're not doing it. We're not doing it. If we had to do it, we would be so screwed. We'd forget and be dead. But rather, it is doing itself and breathing us. We are not breathing, the breath is breathing us. And so in the Vedas, the earliest writings of the sort of considerate people of South Asia, in the Vedas, the first cohesive expression of the universe is known as the breath of life. The breath of life. The Gayatri. The breath of life gives rise both to awareness and to sound, because breath and sound are intimately connected. Later on, focusing on personal experience, the breath of life in a human being, because we are the breath. The breath isn't us, we are the breath. This body and this mind are the cause of nothing. They are the effects of the breath of life expressing itself as us. And that breath of life in the individual form is considered to be divine. It has its own agenda. We control nothing. You guys, some of you have figured that out already. We're all old enough to know we're in control of nothing. And it, whatever that is in control of us. The wonderful thing about yoga, this is an aside, is that for me, yoga means, the definition of yoga is 3 words: contact, alignment, and flow. That is the inner yoga and the yoga of our life. Contact, alignment, and flow within ourselves, and contact, alignment, and flow in the world we live in. Establishing, recognizing that there is a divine, when I say divine, a cosmic force that is at the core of our life, that we can't control, that has its own agenda, and is, basically doing us, means that in order to come to some kind of peace within ourselves, and to some kind of real understanding of the reality of our circumstance, it is important for us to establish contact, become aligned in and flow with and from that power which has created and sustains us, and which is expressing itself in the field of all of our sense data. Well, that divine power, and in the case of the Tantric tradition, all power is called Shakti. I think it's called feminine because I think it's given a feminine gender, not because in the ultimate reality there's any gender at all, because there isn't, but in the ultimate, in the sort of intermediate sense, it's given a gender identity because all the power in the community was in the hands of women. This power was called Kundalini. Kundalini is the cosmic breath of life manifest as the fundamental core, the center of gravity, the condensation point around which all cognition, perception, and physiological process are organized. If we really understood this, actually, our whole understanding of our American model of reality would completely crumble. We would find within ourselves, transcendent of anything that we could possibly consume, an appreciation of the beauty that is and the abundance that is available to us, that requires no effort, or I should say little effort and no currency to experience. Kundalini is respiratory process that is the core of our individual existence. And its fundamental expression, called Prana Kundalini, is not the breath, our breathing, because our breathing is an effect still. That fundamental expression is the fluctuation of the energy within the cerebral spinal fluid. The experience of which is accessible to us if we can simply hold the awareness of our breath. How simple is that? You know, fortunately for me, I grew up in a little town in Indiana. And I like to describe it as a shitty little place. It was a place where a bunch of rednecks from eastern Kentucky and West Virginia migrated to work in factories. And these were not happy people. It was a mean place, it was a dark place, and it was sort of a violent place for a little town. You know, kind of a great place to be from. And so I've always thought that, you know, this isn't rocket science. And if I can get it, coming from where I come from, anybody can get it. And it requires only the simplest of efforts, explored over and over and over and over and over again as we refine ourselves and increase our sensitivity. As we develop our model, we understand better. Prana Kundalini is the dimension in us where all health resides. The divine creative power that is at our core has as its agenda for human beings physically health. Why not? I mean, it is full of energy and it has absolute range of motion. Profoundly vital. When I was 23 and Rudy had just died, I had the opportunity to meet a guy who was the assistant to the person who developed cranial osteopathy. A man named Sutherland developed cranial osteopathy as a completion of an American guy who, after the Civil War, developed a whole understanding that is called of the human body, human mechanism, which is called osteopathy. Cranial osteopathy was its completion. Sutherland developed cranial osteopathy, and his assistant was Roland Becker, the son of the first student of the founder of osteopathy. And I met him in Dallas. And he was an amazing person who cared not for money. In those days, he used to take $7 for an office visit. And then at the end of his life, by the 90s, he was up to $35 an office visit. And he only cared about his participation in an understanding of the breath of life. And meeting him was like a miracle for me, and part of my own process, because it caused me to completely understand how Kundalini operated on the physical and material plane. Health is inside you. It's not elsewhere. Contact, alignment, and flow is connecting to and facilitating the delivery of your own vital resources from your core through to the tissue. In the process, dissolving every trauma and strain, restoring over and over and over again to all the tissue, the organs and the muscle and your nerve tissue, its full, and later on fuller, and still later on fullest potential range of motion. Prana Kundalini is the vibrancy of your physiology that we refer to as health. The next dimension of Kundalini is Chitta Kundalini. And Chitta refers to mind. Chitta Kundalini is the vibrancy of our nervous system in its grossest. The grossest form of Chitta Kundalini is the vibrancy of our nervous system. And the finest dimension of Chitta Kundalini is our cognitive capacity. At the highest level, our ability simply to hold our own personal connection with an extraordinarily refined resonance or extraordinarily refined respiratory process that permeates the whole of our magnetic field is based upon the circulation of the vital energy within us through our energetic mechanism. Now, so what I'm saying is this: at the core of your physiology, there's an energetic mechanism. What do I mean? Well, everybody here has probably had some kind of experience with, say, Chinese medicine. And we know by now, we've seen it demonstrated. In fact, even in hospitals and clinics today, and allopathic hospitals, as an accepted and even relied upon methodology for dealing with certain issues. And what the Chinese do is they use needles to stimulate junction points on lines of magnetic force around which our physiology is expressed. So, a human being kind of looks like one of those old dummies that they build dresses on. It's a wire body, and then all of this tissue hangs on those energetic lines of force. Not really wires, but channels, energy channels. Those energy channels, which are called nadis, and their junction points, which are called chakras, are the basis of Chitta Kundalini. And the Prana Kundalini, moving in the cerebral spinal fluid, distributes through the whole field, informing the whole field of its source and its function. It's my own opinion that, this is my opinion, because all the cells in our body start out as neutral stem cells. And then sort of magically they take on a particular, organ function, like a set of stem cells become our liver. How unbelievable is that? And why does that happen? Basically, it's my opinion that the resonance in each dimension of our energetic mechanism informs neutral cells about their function. In other words, a vibration tells a cell how to adapt itself in that particular place and for that particular function. And that's how all our cells get diversified, based on the energetic mechanism. Pretty far out. And so it is Chitta Kundalini informing the Prana Kundalini, which sustains our physiology, and there's no distinction. These are, Kundalini is Kundalini. It has three dimensions of function: physical, cognitive, and cosmic. The final dimension is cosmic, Parakundalini. And this leads me to a simple discussion about, on the highest level, it is a notion of the tantric tradition that there is really ultimately only one life. There's only one life. There's not two lives. There's not a billion lives. There's one life. And that one life, in the particular place that we are, is the life of the earth, the biosphere. There's only one life here, and that is the earth itself is alive. And our physical bodies and our individual lives are not the cause of anything. They are the effects, the expression of the vitality or lack thereof in the biosphere. Chitta Kundalini connects us to, is the point where in Chitta Kundalini there is a point where we connect to the entire biosphere. And that one life, which is the life of the planet, constantly in respiratory process, and in this process giving rise to a multiplicity of dimensions of resonance, causes all of this differentiated expression, very much like the ocean. You know, there's only one ocean. That one ocean is permeated by big currents, which, you know, circulate all of the chemistry, the temperature and pressure of the ocean to equalize it. You have giant currents. And within those giant currents, you have secondary currents. And within those secondary currents, still finer currents, until you get to the point where you have all this chop on the surface. Underlying all of it, constantly at work, is the movement of the tide. And we look at the ocean, and, you know, like I was looking at I had the opportunity to look at the ocean yesterday and this morning. And isn't it amazing how, I don't know if this, maybe you're tired of it by now, but for me, I look at the ocean and it just is so simple and magical just to look and to feel it. And every time I look at it, you know, I can feel, and I'm sure you can too if you want, the breath of life expressing itself in that form and through that medium. Well, we're mostly water too, you know. And so you have all of this activity going on. You have the chop, you have the waves, you have the currents, you have the tide, and yet the ocean is only one. And that ocean is alive. And the temperature and pressure of the ocean is what is the mechanism controlling all of the variety of life forms that are expressed there. Finding our breath and realizing, awakening to movement, the circulation of the breath of life within us. It's ripples, it's chop, it's waves, it's currents, the tide, respiratory process. Begins to make available to us a physical experience, a mental and emotional experience, because at the very core of Chitta Kundalini is our heart. Is our heart. Not the pump, but this place in our physical body, this magnetic core of us, which happens to be 100,000 times more powerful as a magnetic field than our brain. Our heart has a magnetic field to it that is 100,000 times more powerful. Through our heart, we gain access to a psychological and emotional experience of abundance that at times for me is overwhelming. It is so beautiful. There is beauty in each of us that is truly astonishing. A beauty that expresses itself as, on one level, abundance, and on another level, as endless healing. And finally, a perspective that is so peaceful, so restful, that we can reside in it even in the face of every kind of this lunatic world that we live in. And frankly, for me, I think the increasing craziness of the world is really a function of the toxicity in the biosphere. People are crazy and crazier and crazier because they're poisoned. Humanity is poisoned. I mean, you know, I'm not clear if we're completely responsible for poisoning ourselves or not. But, you know, I am quite clear that pollution, antibiotics, vaccines, all the things that we have been sold, you know, I mean, for instance, we were told when we were kids a lot of things that we have learned aren't true. A lot of things. But now, you know, I see on the social media there's always regularly big arguments about, you know, all the things that the medical system is selling us that we know are like really necessary. Well, really? I have really serious and sincere doubts and some personal experience to back it up. We have, you know, so what I'm actually saying is, I don't know if we're responsible or not. If we're effects of one life, then really all this toxicity in humanity is about some pre-existing imbalance in the biosphere that maybe we can't change at all on a cultural and social level. But I can tell you one thing for sure. What is the essence of living? The essence of living is breath. And that process of breath is a taking in of nourishment and a circulation of toxicity, and a releasing of toxicity. Every breath we take is taking in oxygen and releasing metabolic byproduct. Every time we eat food, hopefully we are taking in more nourishment than we're taking in poison, and When we poop, we're sending it out. It was a very interesting thing to see this year, that there's this big announcement. There has finally been a discovery and a recognition of how the brain connects to the immune system. Did you guys ever notice that? Well, how does that happen? It's so interesting that the allopathic world has discovered this, because the basis of A.T. Still's osteopathy is the circulation of the cerebral spinal fluid and the lymphatics. In the lymph glands, the cerebral spinal fluid passes, it comes through the spine to the brain, circulates out of the brain back through the lymph system to the base of the spine, where it rises up again through the spinal column to the brain. This is that respiratory or circulatory mechanism. Turns out the doctors have just discovered that that is how the immune system, because the blood deposits all the information about all the organs in the lymphs, and then it's picked up by the cerebral spinal fluid and deposited in the brain, which then responds. And this is happening 12 times a minute, every minute of our existence, whether we like it or not. The practitioners of Kundalini Yoga called this process the mantra that repeats itself. Well, if we practice tuning into our breath, the fundamental expression of life within us, and we hold that awareness for a little while, till we feel it, till we feel ourselves change, till we feel better. I could say till we feel the natural alignment that is ever present within us rising up and expressing itself, but it also is until we feel better. If we could hold that till we feel better, we would begin to discover an abundance within us, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And this exists in everyone. And so the toxicity of our environment is not really our limitation. By tuning into the breath, by participating ever more consciously in all the dimensions of respiratory process that we are, because that's all we are, we will take in every experience as nourishment, and releasing tensions increasingly awaken and allow our creative energy, our deepest creative energy. I don't like words like divine that much, because the thing about using the word divine is then we're that's a religious term, and then I have to I start accessing all of my Catholic brain again, which I've really worked hard to beat out of myself. But how else can you describe it? Divine because of the vastness of its range of motion. Divine because of the depth and the richness of its quality. Divine because its adaptive power is truly brain-breaking, over and over and over and over again. You have this power, this potency, potential within yourselves. It's present in you now, it was present in you then, and it was present in you even before that. It will be present in you forever. The second that it isn't present, it's not like you die. You cease to have ever existed. That power is within you. And whether or not today you can turn your attention fully to it, at some point in your life, for whatever reason, turn your attention to that simple but unbelievable power within you, and doing nothing but holding that space, allow your energy, allow your spirit to rise up and express itself. And you will be dazzled and amazed.